Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Design Beyond Pixels. This is a series of podcasts that will allow design leaders across the US and Europe to discuss topics completely chosen by them. Today, I'm joined by Katrina Alcorn. Katrina, thanks so much for joining me today. Can you please just give us a short introduction into yourself?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Matt. So I'm Katrina Alcorn. I'm a global design executive. In the course of the last couple decades, I built two really successful design practices. One was at an agency called Hot Studio that was bought by Facebook about 10 years ago. The other was at Autodesk, global software company. And most recently, I led the design practice for IBM, where we had 3,000 designers creating all of IBM's software, hardware, brand, digital experiences, everything, internal tools, all of it. And then one last thing about my bio, I'm the author of a book called Maxed Out, which is about my experience burning out at work. So it is still work related,
Yeah.
although not so specific to design. And in the book, I talk about what companies can do to create the right environment for all employees, including women and caregivers, to thrive.
Yeah, no, awesome. And to be fair, the episode before this, if anyone's watched it, we I delved deeper into that with my last guest in terms of burnout and things like that. So it's may not be this podcast we discussed that, but there's definitely another one previously. But yeah, look, for anyone who hasn't seen this podcast before, hasn't watched any of the other episodes, it's going to be slightly different to maybe many of that you've seen about recently. I'm giving my guests full ownership of what we're going to discuss during their episodes. Katrina, obviously, I gave you the task of picking some topics that you wanted to go through today. Can you please just share, what topics we're going to be covering off today?
Yeah, I have two topics I want to talk about today, and I think they're both pretty timely. So the first one will be about things that business leaders, so not the design leaders, but everyone else who's leading a company, things that they can do to set up design for success. And then the other topic, of course, is about AI, because how can we have a podcast
Yeah,
right
very
now
true.
without AI?
Yeah,
But specifically, I want to talk about the work that designers do to design the AI tools themselves.
awesome. Yeah, I think two super relevant topics right now. I think as we were obviously putting together the topics, I think that we, definitely discovered that certainly in the AI perspective, that obviously it's a very talked about thing right now. I think there's a lot of questions about what it's going to do for our future and what that's going to look like. But the actual design of the tools itself is obviously something you want to cover off during this talk, which I think will be very insightful for our listeners for sure. But yeah, obviously starting off with our first topic, how business leaders can set up design for success. So give us a bit more context behind this. What does that mean to you from a more general perspective? How business leaders can really help design and effectively help design leaders set up the function itself.
Yeah. Well, here's why I think this topic matters so much and why it's so timely. I think a lot of companies are not getting the full value of their investment in design.
Yeah,
And I think that this is actually causing some of the backlash that we've seen recently. Fast Company's done several stories about this, about companies, slashing design, cutting their design leadership roles, moving design under product and engineering leaders. And I think what happened is a lot of these same companies 10 and 20 years ago, they were jumping on the design bandwagon and they
yeah,
thought all they needed to do was hire a bunch of designers and magic would happen. And, then they found out it doesn't exactly work that way. Design is really good design is hard. It's hard to do and it requires comprehensive culture change at a lot of companies. And that goes way beyond just the design function.
yeah,
So I believe that business leaders have a responsibility to engage in design transformation. You can't opt out of design. Everything is designed. So, but to actually get the value of their investment, they need to know a few things about design. They don't have to be experts.
yeah,
Um, so I'd like to talk about what those things are because I think these are the things we can
yeah.
advocate for in culture change.
Yeah, for sure. I think just referencing Bob Baxley, who I know you obviously met recently and know as well. We had this discussion that's a little bit, on this particular topic, not completely around it, but he was mentioning when he was at the Apple, going back a few years now, of course, but I think he spoke very highly about the culture there, and it was
Yeah.
obviously a design-led business, but I think a lot of companies like to think they're design-led. But he was speaking about, it wasn't just the designers, it wasn't just the product guys, it wasn't just engineers that really, were design-driven. It was, the receptionists, it was, the people that weren't
Yeah.
involved in it at all, but just everyone got it and everyone knew what it was about. So, yeah. So talk me through some of the areas that you feel like business leaders need to understand about design in order to really create success in that function.
Yeah. So this topic is super timely for me because I'm giving a talk to business leaders in Helsinki in a couple weeks.
Make sure you get there if you can. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, but in preparing for that talk, I looked at a bunch of design maturity frameworks, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff people have put together. A lot of it is very, very detailed. I find it's too detailed for the audience that we're talking about right now.
Yeah,
The designer audience is a different audience than the business audience.
yeah,
So I've outlined 8 things that I think business leaders need to care about. And it's everything from, looking at, does the company really understand what design is? Are you still stuck in the fonts and colors aspect of design,
yeah,
or is there an understanding that actually there's a bigger thing at work with design? And then, well, we can go through them, but it's
yeah,
everything
of
from
course.
to down to how you measure the value of design, things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Look, I know you've said you've got 8 points, and we'll go through them individually. But yeah, I think the first part, as you mentioned, is understanding design and what it can actually do for the business. I think there are, still so many businesses out there that see design as just a creative function, a discipline that makes things look or feel good in their product suites. But I think I think it's come a long way for sure. I think the design role has become a lot more business and strategic focused than it once was. But I still think there's a long way to go. It'll be interesting when we obviously go into AI and how you think that may impact things as well. But yeah, how have you, in your previous roles, and yeah, how have you really enabled the business side to really understand design and what it can do for them?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things I did in my last role at IBM was to kind of bring forth this definition of what is great design.
Mhm.
And it's more than fonts and colors, although
Yeah,
fonts and colors are often involved. So
yeah, of
uh,
course, yeah. Mhm.
the definition that I kind of shared across the company was really 3 things. It's, are you solving the right problem for customers? And that, by the way, is really important step that many, many, many companies skip over. So are you solving the right problem? Then are you solving that problem well? And that speaks to the elegance of the solution you come up with. And then the last piece is, is the solution you're developing aligned to the brand and the values? And brand is often well documented. Values are often also well documented. Things like ethical use of data. Okay, well, we're designing an AI system. Are we actually adhering to those values
Yeah,
that we care about? So it's got to hit all 3 of those things. And then um how you actually implement that across the company, there are many, many ways. One thing that we did at my last company is we had this wonderful program for actually scoring the quality of design work on a product before it launched. And this was it was like a, review process that we would do with a cross-functional team. We had a very clear set of heuristics to follow. So we were kind of educating our partners on what is good design, but also getting them to work with us to actually score the product along these metrics. And then at the end, we would give the product a score before it shipped. And over time, what we saw is that scores improved because everyone felt accountable to
yeah,
actually meeting all of those parts of what good design is.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a great solution. I think it must, as you said, it must make everyone feel very accountable getting towards the end. I think everyone probably naturally becomes a little bit more critical when it's a team effort at the end to say, look, we've created this. How does everyone, really feel about it effectively? And I think there's probably some honesty coming out at that point, and honest
Yes.
conversations. But yeah, I think it's a great method. I wanted to ask you a question, Katrina, because I think there's probably a lot of design leaders that may watch this, or may not watch this. Hopefully they do, of course. But just sitting there, thinking, how can I approach these types of conversations with business leaders? Because I think dependent on where they sit in the business and how senior they may be, and who they report to right now, I think it's always a difficult situation for a design leader to go, right, and I want to do this. I want to make the business, or at least give them the tools to understand, how influential design can be. But what advice would you give in terms of how they can approach those types of conversations, what they can bring to the table in order to do that?
Yeah, this is a really tricky thing. So I know the audience for this podcast is design leaders, but the workshop that I'm putting together around these principles is not for design leaders, it's
Yeah,
for business leaders. And the reason I'm doing that is I think a lot of design leaders are not set up for success. So how do you make that change from within?
yeah,
It's really tough. I think a lot of it comes down to trust and relationships. And hierarchy does matter where you sit in the organization,
yeah,
for better or worse. People pay attention to that. So if you are in the lucky position of, being the leader of a big design function and kind of having the title that goes along with that, I think you can use that as a platform to have conversations with your peers in other disciplines and start to bring them along, with some of these concepts. But it's tricky. And I think the other thing is, when we have to be careful in design that we don't get into preach mode and we're not just telling everyone what they should be doing.
yeah,
That's not
yeah,
the point of this. We want the company to get the full investment out of design. We
yeah,
want our products and services to be better. We want our company to work better. So how do we do that together? Well, here's what we're doing in design, and here's where we need your help. And I think when we have the trust with cross-functional partners,
yeah.
we do get that support.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a great point. I think you're doing the right thing ultimately. I think it's not necessarily. I think there is the part of obviously potentially looking at educating design leaders how and they can approach that and things like that. But ultimately, some of them, even they could be the best, at
Yeah.
pitching design, and trying to build those relationships with the business leaders. But if the business leaders ultimately don't understand, or ultimately don't really buy into the ideas, then their work is wasted. And they end up just being deliverers of the requirements from elsewhere, right? Which is not where design really wants to be. Now I know, that. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Can I give one other example just to make this super tangible? So
Yeah,
my last several roles, I was leading the design function. So I was not reporting to a design leader. I was reporting to someone who, kind of knew a bit about design, but not a lot.
yeah,
And I mean, there are many situations where I would just coach my boss and I would say, okay, so we're going to invite you to this design review, and it's really important that you
yeah,
participate. And here's why. And here's a couple questions I'm hoping you'll ask, because it will make the rest of the team pay attention to this. So
yeah,
like but again, it starts with trust. I can't
yeah,
have that kind of conversation with someone if there isn't a mutual level of
yeah,
respect and trust.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, again, I think it's a great idea to try and involve them in those types of things. But if you don't have that trust initially, or you're failing to do so, it's hard to move the needle from that perspective. Now I know, the next point we wanted to obviously cover was, and you mentioned it before, was I think that the companies are out there who think they understand their customers or their user base, but often missing the topic, or missing the point when customers are providing feedback or from research, and they're often potentially solving problems that aren't necessarily the reality. But how do
Yeah.
you you know how have you experienced that? What would your advice be in terms of what companies can do, or what leaders can do to really get
Yeah.
to understand their customer base?
Yeah. So delivering great design requires, like you said, that we understand the people we're designing for. And that's just design 101. It's product, development
Yeah,
101, really. It's still shocking to me how few senior executives understand that concept. Or they'll think that because they talked to one or two customers last week that they understand customers, but that's not necessarily representative. So um, I've tackled this issue in a number of ways as a design leader. Um, but, I look where I get inspiration is I look at things like the transformation that Microsoft has gone through over the last 10 years. I've never worked at Microsoft, so I'm just seeing it from
yeah,
afar. But I'm an admirer of Satya Nadella. I read his book, The CEO of Microsoft.
yeah,
And while he doesn't really talk about design, the book is it's almost like it's written by a design leader because he uses all the words we use: empathy, understanding customers, feedback loops, being vulnerable, being humble, being willing to listen. Like these are all customer-centered principles that we try to embody in design, but really that's the kind of culture change we need to have. So my advice to business leaders and this workshop that I'm leading in a couple
Yeah,
weeks is start asking your teams questions about who our target users are. Start with these questions. They're very basic, but if you're not getting the same answer every time, it means there's a lack of alignment. There's not a shared understanding. And so
yeah,
let's start there. And then of course, helping people understand there's this discipline called UX research that is there to help you be
yeah,
smarter
yeah.
about who your customers are and what they need and how their needs will evolve over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think across the board research is often an overlooked discipline that can actually be so beneficial and so helpful for this exact topic, right?
Mm.
You know, um I think the involvement of dedicated research teams has come a long way, you know, certainly since I've been doing design recruitment. But, you know, obviously in the market we see ourselves in today, you know, design as a whole, but obviously research is getting hit hard because you know people just don't really see the value in it. But you know, ultimately, this is probably a great point to double down on that side to really understand what you can do differently and what can actually you know keep your product alive and help excel it. But I think it's you know again it's a discipline that's often overlooked and. I think that you know it should be its own discipline. You know, there's talented people out there that are really focused on this area and can add real value. But it is you know it is overlooked at times.
Yeah, agreed. I there's a number of ways that I've tackled that in my last few companies, and I think the most successful one was work that our team did at Autodesk several years ago, where there was no shared understanding of who the customer was, and so we undertook this huge UX research project, which that UX research was part of the design function
Yeah,
to identify not every person or we had something like 100 personas, but we said, no, we're going to pick five. These are the five iconic. They're
yeah,
very broad based, but they're almost like we called them Uber personas. They were almost like profiles, and they were very data driven. But they helped us understand the big sets of needs people had, and then we did a bunch of work to kind of help the company understand their needs and what their top pain points were and where they were having issues in the customer journey. And at one point, we actually created these 4-foot tall posters showing these Uber personas in their customer journey, and the CEO put them in front of his office. It was a big hit. So, some of this is like an educational campaign.
yeah,
It's not just the doing the work itself. It's kind of getting everyone on the same page about who are these people? What do we
yeah.
need to know about them?
Yeah, I like your idea when you said about you know asking everyone who their user base is or who their customer base is. It felt like you know you're just going to pull one on one like interrogations. Like, what do you
Yes.
know? What do you know?
Right, right, right.
um,
Well, your answer is not matching up to his answer.
yeah,
So what's
yeah,
going
yeah, exactly.
on?
Um, okay, cool. Well, look, I know obviously next sort of point we wanted to come across, and I think obviously, you know, it's where I've been working in for a number of years and looking at the staffing side of it. Obviously, resources come into that as well. But yeah, you know, I think as we've both discussed, I think there was over the last 10, 20 years, there has been a trend. I'll probably put it as a trend that a lot of companies just hired designers and hope that everything would work out without really understanding. And of course, it's the main point here without really understanding what it can actually do. When you look at you know staffing your teams or looked at obviously pitching for headcount or budgets or whatever it might be, what were you really focusing on in terms of getting those you know headcounts and where technically or typically you were looking to increase staffing?
Yeah. So this is sort of it's funny. This can be a controversial topic, although I don't know why, but I'm a big believer in establishing a ratio. Like, what is the ratio for a balanced team?
Yeah,
Because it gives you a rule of thumb. It doesn't mean that you don't use critical thinking. Not every team needs to have the exact same makeup of skills and
mm,
roles, but at least having a sense of what you're aiming for will give you a sense of, whether you're really off the mark or whether you're kind of close to your ideal. And so the long story short, after much research and a lot of different data points from different companies, the rule of thumb that I give people is 1 to 1 to 8 is a really good ratio for enterprise software companies when you're looking at design to product management to engineering.
Yeah. Yeah.
That number may change depending on what, people are doing, but if you've got 20 engineers and 1 designer and 2 product managers, something is off.
Yeah.
So, and that is, unfortunately, that tends to be the norm, is what I've seen, is companies overweight on engineering. Now, here's why this is an issue. So I think there's this belief, and I've run up against this belief in the executive ranks. There's a belief that if we need people to be more productive, we just need more engineers, because engineers are quote unquote doers, right? They're the ones who make things. Designers are
Yeah.
not going to make the product. In theory, the engineers could do all of it. So let's just hire more engineers.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that if you don't have enough designers and product managers setting the direction, making sure that the thing that we're building is the right thing, that there's a product market fit, that there's a real audience, and that they'll pay for it, then you are going to rack up technical debt, because you're going to build things people don't need and they don't want. And and that creates more rework for engineers. So this is why I hammer on the ratio thing, and it's really about helping your engineers be more successful, helping them be more productive, and making sure they have less rework to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, on that topic, I think a lot of designers that I've spoken to have been in those situations where they are heavily outnumbered by the engineers, find it really, really tough to be in those, collaboration conversations with them, because, there are obviously a lot of opinions floating about, especially when you talk about cross-functional departments, right? I think there's always been that debate or a little bit of friction between some departments when it comes to agreeing on things, right? But yeah, I really like that, 1-to-1-to-8 situation. I think it pretty much, matches what I think most companies should aim for. As you said, it may be different in different scenarios, smaller companies, smaller teams, perhaps, but yeah, I think, as you said, if there's a higher ratio of engineers and the designer's not having too much influence, or the product manager's not having too much influence on the actual product direction and roadmap, and allowed to do, research and understand the customer, it proves much more difficult for the engineers to actually build something effective in the end, right?
Yeah, everyone loses at that point.
Yeah. And I think we've seen that. I certainly saw it. I've worked with a lot of startups in my time, and I think a lot of startups have fallen into that trap about just shipping things as quickly as possible. And that's more, a lot of it's based on assumption, what we think
Yeah,
the customer wants,
yeah.
or competitor analysis. I think, companies have, especially in similar industries and sectors, have seen something work well for one company or a couple of companies that are in their space, and they go, right, we're going to do that now. We're going to put that on our app, or integrate it into our product. But you know, it's a different user base. Your user base, just because you're in the same space, doesn't mean it's going to react the exact same way to their new feature or new product that they've built, right? And I think that has been a downfall, a shortfall of some startups in the last couple of years that are just so eager to get things shipped as quickly as possible without really testing or without really understanding their customer.
That's right. Without a bigger picture understanding, a
Yeah.
more basic understanding. Yep, I would agree.
So obviously, you've been in a design leadership position for a while now. You've built many successful teams in your time. Obviously, being a design leader is one thing. I think culture
Mhm.
is a huge part of any team that you're in, whether it be sports, business, whatever it might be. Culture is often defined very differently. What's your opinion on what a healthy culture looks like versus perhaps an unhealthy culture in design specifically?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think there's been a trend recently of companies eliminating the chief design officer type role
Yeah.
and moving design down. And what I would argue is, if you have an amazing product leader who really understands design, and your company has really embraced a customer centric approach, everyone in the company, that may actually work. The problem is most companies are not there. And so I'm a big advocate for, no, no, no. You need a strong design leader to do a few things. They're a talent magnet. They're setting a standard for what great design is, to making it clear what we consider good design at this company and where the bar is, and making sure that they're holding people accountable, but also inspiring people to do their best work. And then they're advocating for the kinds of practices, the kinds of customer centric practices that really all companies need to adopt, that go way beyond design. So they're almost like an ambassador to the rest of the company. They're a culture change leader. Um, and so and then they're looking out for the team. They're making sure that there's a career path for designers and that it makes sense and that it gives people
Yeah.
reasons to stay and build their career and that they have learning opportunities and
Yeah.
there's a knowledge sharing, environment. I've been with companies. I used to consult, so I've seen all the different ways that design can play out in a company, and I've seen amazing cultures where there's a lot of collaboration and a
Yeah.
lot of knowledge sharing, and then I've seen cultures where there's a lot of sort of tribalism and designers,
Yeah.
and kind of holding their secrets and not sharing. And so I think having a really strong leader can help break that down and create a better environment for
Yeah.
everyone to be successful.
Yeah, I think something you mentioned there probably naturally leads us on to the next part as well, which is career paths. Um, I think again, just looking at startup space, but I'm sure it happens in bigger spaces as well, bigger companies. But it's amazing how many companies don't have a defined career path for a designer. um,
I know.
yeah, I literally yesterday I spoke to a company, and I ask them some, pretty standard questions just in terms of what the design career matrix looks like, how success is measured in design right now. And it wasn't, they weren't a new company. They had a small team, but they've been around for a while, and they just couldn't answer my questions. And I was like, how, it's going to be hard to convince someone to come into this business when they say, what do I have to do to get promoted, or what does success look like? And I say, to be honest, they don't really
That's
have anything in place right now.
if your company is trying to hire designers and you don't have a clear career path, basically you're sending a signal that we don't respect your career path. We don't
Exactly.
respect what
Yeah.
you do, and we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
really, we don't value it, but we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
do some stuff. So come work for us.
Yeah, you're
That's
effectively
not
just
a
saying,
good
yeah, you're effectively
first
just saying,
look.
come in and build what we tell you to build, and don't say anything about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
um,
No, you're
but
not going to attract top talent that way.
yeah,
That's for
yeah.
sure.
I mean, look, you've obviously been part of global teams, right? Obviously 3,000 designers is a lot of designers at IBM. How do how have you set up a career matrix before? What are the key things that you look for? Or, what are the main sort of OKRs? How do you measure success when you're looking at, getting designers from A to B in their career?
Yeah. Well, my teams did a lot of work on the career path at Autodesk and also at IBM. A lot of really good work, kind of defining at each stage
Yeah.
of every big corporate company has bands or levels or grades, whatever you call them. Um, I think what I really liked about the IBM career path for designers is that there were two tracks. So there was a management track, which is the typical track, and that goes from, all the way up to an executive level. It went all the way up to my role, a
Yeah.
general manager of design. And then below that were VPs and directors. So those were all executive roles. And then there were non-exec levels. But then there's also a technical track for design. And I love that because I have worked with some incredible design leaders in my career, amazing, amazing talent. Not all of them are good with people. Some of them should never manage people.
Yeah.
But there's a role for them and an important critical role for them. And so that's where I love having this technical track. Now at IBM, our technical track went all the way up to fellow. So again, a very high
Yeah.
level executive, level. And so when you bring a new designer into a company that's defined the path that way, it gives you a lot to aspire to. It gives you a lot of reasons to keep kind of
Mm.
moving up and expanding in your career.
Yeah. So important for retention as well, right? Um,
Yes. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I just think, any career that you're in, doesn't matter if it's design or whatever you do, you should have career goals in place. You should have a career path, at least know, what you need to achieve to get promoted, pay rises, etc. I think, companies are so naive at times when they think, oh, why is our turnover so high? Well, if you don't have a design career matrix, that's probably a good place to start. And I think, again, just going back to, earlier stage teams, earlier stage companies, I think they massively overlook this part. They again, they're just so focused on shipping things, and they hire someone who's, maybe happy to do it at that time, but more often than not, they stay there for 6, 12 months, maybe 18 months max, and they're like, well, where do I go now? And
That's right.
ultimately that's somewhere else where we'll give them that chance to get promoted and progress in their career. And I think that the definition of each level is very important as well, because it's one thing saying, okay, yeah, you're senior now, you'll be lead next year or whatever. But what does that actually look like? What
Yeah.
changes about the role? Is it just like a title change, or is there actually change in responsibilities and scope and actual impact that the people can have in their careers?
And think about how expensive it is for a company when those people
Yeah,
don't feel valued and they leave.
yeah,
Because if you're creating really complex stuff, I mean, like security
yeah,
software, automation, AI powered software, some of these
yeah,
products require so much domain expertise. You cannot hire any talented designer off the street and put them to work right away.
yeah,
They're gonna have a long ramp up. And so every time you've got people quitting and leaving your company for a
yeah,
company where they're going to be more valued, whether or not that's true,
yeah.
you're losing that knowledge and then you're starting over with someone.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like it's so relevant in today's market. I think we're in a market of of specialists right now. SMEs, people who've had extensive experience in particular domains or industries, and lots of people. There's not too many out there. There's lots of people, especially in design, because of the creative function, but also because it's heavily undeveloped in comparison when it comes to things like career paths and things like that. Designers are jumping around. I think generally in design, especially at IC level, they tend to move around a bit quicker than perhaps other functions. But again, more often than not, it's just because things aren't set up enough for them to succeed at that company. So they seek it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
okay, cool. Well, look, if happy for me to move on, Katrina. I think just time wise, obviously, just move on to the next part of our conversation, which is, of course, designing products powered by AI. Um, Now, as we said, I think there's obviously a big hype about AI and what it's going to do to design as a whole, just general industries as well. Obviously in recruitment, we're using a ton of the products right now. Some are good, some aren't so great. um, but yeah, you wanted to talk more specifically about designing the actual products themselves as opposed to
Yeah.
integrating them. So yeah, what's
Yeah.
what's your what's your approach and what's your thoughts on building AI products right now from a design perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been speaking at a lot of design conferences recently, and of course, AI is the hot topic. But I'm surprised by how much the conversation, like you said, has been centered on, what products are you using to be more effective as a
Yeah,
designer job, and how are you leveraging AI? But someone is designing those products with AI. It's
yeah,
designers. So how is that changing what we work? And so there's I was really in the center of this in my last role because so much of what we were doing at IBM was powered by artificial intelligence,
yeah,
and it goes way back to beating the world chess champion and the Jeopardy champion with AI technology. But um, the designers there were doing some really interesting work and are still doing some really interesting work around what does it mean to design with AI? How does that change our job? And one of the critical points is, we've always had to be somewhat of an expert in people and their needs. That hasn't changed. We're still designing things
yeah,
that real people will use. But now we also need to start to know a lot about data in a way that we didn't have to before. So, um, I think some of it is about designers getting more comfortable with the different types of data and the different problems that come with leveraging data and bringing data together and what that means to actually make an AI powered
yeah,
product successful. And then I think the other big piece is around ethics. And I think that, if I were to look at just the trend that I've seen over the last 20 plus years in my career, design has been asked to take on higher and higher levels of abstraction and complexity. In the early days of the internet, we were designing very simple interfaces. It was just hypertext, a lot of links.
yeah,
And then we started branching into information architecture and thinking about how those links came together. And that was it added a dimension to the work. And then we started designing design systems. And so we weren't just creating bespoke experiences, but we were thinking about how all of these experiences come together in powerful ways that improve the user experience and also make our work more efficient. And now with AI, this is a major technical leap because for the first time, we are designing a product where we don't know what the output will be. That's what Gen AI is. It's based on probabilities. It's, it's somewhere in there, it's based on math, but we can't see it. It's invisible to us. And so as designers, I think what we're really doing is we're figuring out how to design the conditions for an AI human relationship to be more successful. And that's this new level of abstraction, and it brings in all kinds of issues around how we use data and all kinds of issues around ethics. And, thinking not only about what could go right, but what could go wrong and how do we mitigate for that?
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, it's a huge advancement in technology, right? It's happened many, many times in the past. But as you said, it's the first time that people are designing things with very little understanding of what the actual output is going to be, and you can't physically see it. So it's
Yeah.
it is it's a whole new skill set, it's a whole new learning process for designers. And I was speaking to Richard Banfield on the previous podcast, and we were chatting about this topic as well. And I wanted to hear your opinion on it as well, Katrina. But obviously, there's been a lot of layoffs recently, right? And I think a huge portion of that is because of the overhiring period that has happened, certainly after COVID. But I think it probably goes back before that anyway. But his viewpoint was that yes, it's probably because of that, but I think some of it is because the AI is advancing very rapidly, and there is probably going to be a point where AI can do certain parts of the design role perhaps better than a human can. Now, what his advice to every designer was, it was to upskill yourself as quickly as possible with these newer technologies, because there's, the market's probably not going to wait for you. And some of these roles that were here now, in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, they may, they may rehire people, but the skill set may be, drastically different because of what they're trying to implement. But what's your take on that?
Well, it's funny. So one of the podcasts I listen to stay up on AI is actually the Ezra Klein podcast. He's a New York Times columnist and
Yeah.
really smart guy, brilliant podcaster and journalist. He had an episode about is AI going to kill our jobs? And I think I don't think any of us really knows. But he
Mm.
brought up the internet and he said, at the birth of the internet, we had the same fear. And people said, the internet is going to make us so much more productive and it's going to eliminate a bunch of jobs and we need to be ready for it. And that's not what happened. Now, it did make some things easier. I was a journalist. My first career was in journalism. And I'm old enough to remember when I had to go to the library to do research.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's really dating me now. It was the cusp of the late 90s. And there wasn't a lot online. And then as the internet became a richer source of information, like that went away. You could
Yeah.
do your work from home, you could do it from the office, you didn't have to go to the library. So some things got easier, but also a bunch of new things got harder. We all got more distracted, and we all ended up taking on new types of work around social media. And now journalists have to have a brand, and they,
Yeah.
whatever, whether it's good or bad, that's the sort of
Yeah.
reality now. So I think the same might happen with AI. It's too early to say like what
Yeah.
the net will be, but definitely new jobs will arise from this work. And what I would advise designers is don't think of yourself as only a consumer of AI tools. You are also a creator
Yeah.
of AI tools. Someone still has to be the grown up in the room saying, how do we want this thing to work? It's not
Yeah.
going to design itself. And if it did, that would probably not be a good thing.
Yeah.
So, at
Yeah.
least not for the next 10 or so years. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe in
um,
the maybe
I don't know. Maybe there's some future where we're
the
all
later future.
bonbons and
Yeah.
somehow the machines are like doing everything. But
Yeah.
um, I think the work will be there, but we're still going to need designers who ground us in the principles of good human-centered innovation,
Yeah.
understanding what problem do we want this AI system to solve, and how are we going to create the right parameters so that it will solve it and be less likely to do the bad things that we know sometimes AI can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the advancement will be an interesting one. As you said, I think when the internet first came out, there was always a worry and concern about how far it would take us. But it seemed to be it's a massively advantageous thing to utilize in most careers these days. for better or for worse, with the introduction of social media and things like that. Of course, the world has shifted a lot. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But what in terms of the actual AI powered products that designers potentially will be building now, or certainly in the very near future, with a lot of it, a lot of companies trying to see where they can leverage AI to make their products better. What do you think designers could do today to design AI powered products?
Yeah. Well, I think embracing the whole data challenge, really starting to educate yourself on the different types of data, the different issues that come up with trying to leverage data into a system to get insights and drive generative AI, is important. They're a great resource is something that we developed at IBM, which is still available on the IBM website. It's this enterprise design thinking for artificial intelligence, and it's a set of design thinking methods that designers or anyone on a product team can use to facilitate the really hard, complicated, um, you know, discussions that you need to have with a cross-functional team around data. So, and I actually ran, this was a really interesting exercise for me. I ran a half-day workshop with 250 designers in Bangalore, teaching them 8 of these methods. And we had a really good time, but also I think we all learned a lot. And I think people getting their hands dirty with some of these methods helped them think about, ways that they could evolve the methods for their own work. So I would really encourage designers to get your hands dirty with some of this stuff. And don't forget what you know. Reground yourself on what you already know. You understand the principles of human-centered design. That's not going away. We're going to need people to still do this, even when
Yeah.
they're designing with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think, as much as it will aid and potentially replace parts of the role, as you said, it's still going to be, we're still going to need humans. The humans are still going to be consumers of whatever you may be building, AI focused or AI powered or not, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's some great advice. Now, I know you mentioned ethics obviously playing a big part into AI. Now, AI is obviously a newer concept that's coming out. I think ethics have certainly been in question with some of the AI product lines that have been coming out. But what do you think the role of ethics in designing AI powered products really looks like right now?
I'm starting to take a pretty have a pretty firm opinion about this. I think ethics is going to be synonymous with the role of the designer. I
Yeah,
think in the past, when we were designing things that did not involve AI, the ethics challenges were not as complicated, and like, for me, early in my career, when I was actually doing hands-on design, it was more like, do I want to work with that company? Do they represent my
yeah,
values? And once I said yes, then it was just doing the
yeah,
job. I think it's different with AI because of the thing I said earlier, that the outcomes are probabilistic, they're not deterministic. So no longer is the machine just giving an output based on an input. The output could be different every time, and it's less controllable, and so can feel
yeah,
less predictable. The way that we make that work as designers is to create the parameters around, how the problem is solved within an AI system. And this gets into the abstract, complex
yeah,
stuff. But I think as designers, you know, the the important thing with ethics is to start to really understand data, start to understand compliance rules and issues around, what you're allowed to do with data, what you're not allowed to do with data. Make the consequences of misusing the data real to your product team. That's where our storytelling
yeah,
ability comes in. Um, and then, the other thing that can be really helpful, and this isn't some of the design thinking methods we played with, is future forecasting. So there's like a whole, realm of design thinking, just around predicting the future and like designing for the future. And I think that can be really valuable with artificial intelligence because it helps us think through not only what could go right, but what could go wrong. And we know, if anyone is paying any attention to, how Gen AI is evolving right now, we know that when things go wrong, they can go really wrong. There's all kinds of bias issues that can come up. There's all kinds of um, all kinds of issues around accuracy,
yeah.
misleading people. So we don't want those things to happen. They don't have to happen, but it means that we have to really take responsibility for the ethics and the outcomes that we're driving.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's like anything really, isn't it? It's about understanding the boundaries, the restrictions, and ultimately implementing rules that will, follow ethics. And it comes down to, as you said, just highly educating yourself on compliance, on how you can use data, what data you can or can't use, and things like that. Because yeah, I think there has been some obviously stories and things of that that the AI has not been utilized correctly or in an ethical way. And yeah, I think designers just have to understand that and ultimately upskill themselves enough to be in a position. And it comes down to again, I think it comes right back to our first topic. This is probably going to be what the future is going to look like. And if you want to help business leaders understand why design is important, but obviously again going back to AI, how you can leverage AI or build AI products that are going to improve the products, you need to have that understanding of that and be able to tell the business leaders and show them exactly what needs to be done with it effectively. Um,
That-
but yeah, Karina, look, really, really appreciate your time. Um, yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for jumping on. Hope you've enjoyed. Yeah, for anyone who's obviously listening, just going back to Katrina, you're giving a talk in Helsinki in March, right? On the
Yeah.
first topic that we discussed. That's the Elisa Design Summit. So if anyone can get there, definitely do. But of course, check out Katrina's other, books and blogs and everything that you're posting right now because it's high quality content for sure. um, just before I let you go, Katrina, one sort of uh, question that I'm asking every guest at the end of these podcasts is if you were to build what, in your opinion, what a perfect design team would look like, what would it look like and why?
Oh my gosh, a perfect design team.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer that question without knowing what are we designing?
Yeah.
What are we designing? Do I need
Yeah.
more content people? Do I need more research people? How well do we know the
Yeah.
customer? I guess it's
Yeah.
my answer would be very, very contextual
Yeah.
to those things. But maybe another way to answer that is, thinking about the team as a whole. The sum is greater. What is it? The whole is greater than the sum of its
Mhm.
parts. And always when I've put together teams, I don't only look at who the individuals are that I'm
Yeah.
putting into roles, but also, people are complicated and multifaceted. And so, what is the skill makeup of the team? What are the communication styles of the team? How diverse is the team in terms of different backgrounds, race, gender, all the other things? Um, and trying to kind of fill out that hole so that we create a team that is really better together. And then it's all about creating the environment where people feel safe and they can take risks and they trust each other and they can go farther faster.
Awesome. Great answer. I know it's a difficult one to answer, and that some of the other guests have had the same, they've answered in a similar way. It is tough
Oh,
without,
interesting.
yeah, without providing context or what you're designing effectively. It is difficult, but I think the general consensus, as you said, it's about understanding, what gaps you have in your team, what skill sets are already there. But trying to create a very holistic, diverse team that could bring different facets to the team and to the culture, and ultimately create a safe space for everyone to be as innovative and creative as they want to in the design function world. But
Exactly.
yeah, again, Katrina, thanks very much for your time. It's been awesome. Yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Matt. Enjoyed it.